Hey everyone, this is going to be a slightly different video. Recently, I streamed a game called Mexican Ninja, and following that stream, I left a review explaining why, despite enjoying parts of the game, I ultimately couldn't recommend it. The developers have since responded to that review and raised some concerns about how I've characterized both the game and my conversation with them. So rather than have this turn into a back and forth when we're talking about what happened, I wanted to provide the full context, clarify a couple of things that I could have worded better, and explain how I arrived at my decision. Before we go any further, please don't use this video as any reason to contact or harass the developers. I don't think they're terrible people. I don't want anyone attacking them. We may fundamentally disagree about a creative decision that they've made, but that's okay. First of all, I actually quite like parts of this game. It's a fairly simplistic roguelike built around a parry mechanic, and while I had issues with things like visual clarity, foreground elements obscuring combat, and some inconsistent counterattacks, there were some stuff here that I genuinely enjoyed. The music's great. In particular, I love how it dynamically changes and moves between combat and exploration, and the meta progression gives you a growing number of moves and possibilities as you can continue playing. This is important context because I didn't go into this game looking for something to dislike. And even after what we're about to discuss happened, I described it on stream as otherwise a pretty good game. That's genuinely how I felt. While fighting the fourth boss, the character used a word that I didn't recognize. Someone in my chat then pointed out its meaning to me and then told me that it was a homophobic slur. And the developers are correct about something that they've subsequently said, which is that I didn't initially recognize the word as a slur because it was Spanish. Now, I'm not disputing that, but once I heard the word and somebody told me what it meant, having learned what it meant, my feelings about what was in the game and what I had read out loud had just changed. Now, I don't think there's anything particularly unusual about that. Once I understood what had been said, I was disappointed. And for me, it crossed the line from a game having crude and vulgar humor into something that I wasn't particularly comfortable broadcasting anymore. The developers have highlighted something that I said in that stream in their response to my review. Specifically, hopefully, we can make some noise about this. I think it's important that I provide the surrounding context here because those words were not said in isolation. So here is the clip in its unedited form.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna main menu this. Alright. Well, that was Mexican Ninja. If you want to try it out for yourself, I will leave a link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I'm very disappointed that slurs are included in this game. Hopefully enough noise gets made so that maybe they take that out, because it just spoils what is a pretty good game, in my opinion. Doesn't really need to be there. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!
And here is the clip of me saying that I plan to pass my feedback on to the developers.
I don't understand why it needed to be like that at all. Like, big cameras. Like, yeah, it just didn't need that. Didn't need to be like that at all. Didn't need to. Didn't need to. Um, yeah. Do you reckon you can send me the text, and then I can report that in their Discord. I think I'm in the Discord.
What I actually said was that I would leave the developer feedback about it and that I had hoped that enough noise might be made so that they might reconsider removing the language, because I felt it spoilt what was otherwise a pretty good game and it didn't need to be there. So, to be completely clear, yes, I wanted attention to be brought to the issue. I hope that by raising it and by providing feedback, the developers might reconsider the line. What I wasn't asking for was a review bombing campaign. I wasn't asking my viewers to attack anybody. And I wasn't trying to damage the game or the people who made it. I wanted to raise an issue that I had with something in the game and I was otherwise enjoying, and in the hope that the developer might reconsider it. They ultimately didn't. Following the stream, I contacted the developers. I told them that I liked the game, but that encountering the homophobic language had really thrown me and had ultimately contributed to me ending the stream early. I asked them to consider removing it. Their initial response was, "The entire game is filled with slurs. It doesn't take itself seriously. I would ask you to not try and find problems where they don't exist." That response disappointed me. Not because they said no, they're completely within their rights to say no. What bothered me was the suggestion that I'm trying to find problems where they don't exist. I hadn't gone in looking for this. I was quite happily playing the game and sharing it with my community when I encountered something that made me uncomfortable. It made my community uncomfortable, and then I decided to give feedback to the developers about it. So I responded and I explained that. Afterward, the developer sent me a much more considered response. You can see it on the screen. They explained that the game intentionally contains crude, offensive, and provocative dialogue, and that some of the language is intended to characterize its villains as awful people. They said that they didn't believe the line was inconsistent with the game's tone and didn't intend to remove it. They also said that they understood that if that meant that I no longer wanted to play or cover the game. And I want to be fair here, that was a perfectly reasonable response. They explained their creative intention, they acknowledged my objection, and they made their decision. We ultimately disagree. This brings me to something that I wrote in my Steam review. I described my conversation with the developer as unproductive. The developers have objected to that and said that I've characterized the conversation as unproductive simply because they refuse to change the game. Having looked back over the entire conversation, I think my wording there was too broad. Their initial response felt dismissive to me, and that was largely what I was thinking about when I wrote that. But their subsequent response did engage with what I had said and explain their position, so I want to correct that. The conversation ultimately resulted in us understanding each other's positions. It just didn't result in us agreeing. Those two things aren't the same thing. The developers have also subsequently explained that the word in question isn't used or considered a slur within the specific cultural context of their Latin American team that they're drawing from. I think that it's important context, and I don't want to speak over people from a culture that isn't my own. Language can have dramatically different meanings and connotations depending on where you are and who's using it. And at the same time, I can only explain how that language affected me and my community when it appeared in the version of the game that I was broadcasting. Understanding their intent gives me more context, but it doesn't necessarily change how I feel about its inclusion. And this is probably the most important clarification that I want to make. I did not give this game a negative recommendation because the developers told me no. My review contains both praise and criticism of the game itself. I praised the music. I praised the progression. I enjoyed the fundamental gameplay loop. I criticized its visual readability, the foreground elements obstructing combat, issues with parrying, and the overall simplicity of the experience. The offensive language was ultimately another part of that experience, and for me, it was significant enough that I no longer felt comfortable supporting or recommending the game. And the developers have every right to disagree with me, and they have every right to make the game that they want to make. And they have every right to stand by that decision and every word that they've put into it. But creative freedom does not mean freedom of criticism. Just as they're allowed to decide what belongs in their game, I'm allowed to decide what I'm comfortable broadcasting to my community and what I'm comfortable recommending to people. Neither of us has to change the other's mind. So that's where things stand for me. I think there are things that I could have communicated better, particularly describing the entire conversation as unproductive, and I'm happy to correct that. But I stand by the substance of my review and my decision not to recommend the game. I don't think the developers are bad people, and I don't think the people who enjoy this game are bad people. I certainly am not asking anybody who is watching this to go after a small development team just because I happen to disagree with something that they've put in the game. I'm not asking anybody to stop playing or stop enjoying it. They've explained their position to me, and I've explained mine. I'm simply making this video because some of the things that I have said have subsequently been used to question the motivation or the agenda supposedly behind my review. And I think the fairest response is to simply provide the full context and let you guys make up your own mind. For me personally, this is where things end, and I'm going to leave things there. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.